So this is my first YouTube video, and I'm going to be talking about the books I've read so far this year. It's not a lot, it's like only 12 or 14. I meant to do this in July when it would be like, half the year, so then I could be like, here's the books, what I read in half the year, in the first half of the year, but I just didn't get around to making it then. I was just lazy. So yeah, I'm making it now. I've kind of a lot of non-fiction, some classics in there. Yeah, there's a track at one. Okay, so the first book I read this year was Heart of Darkness. Hold on, let me see what I said about it. Because I reviewed all of these on Goodreads and on Storygraph as well, but I can't remember what I said about it. Okay, because Goodreads doesn't allow half stars, I gave it 3, but in my review I said it's a 3.5 star book. So yeah, I was listening to this on audiobook, and the first half of it didn't really strike me as too much. Like there was stuff in it, obviously. I mean, it's the first half of a book. There's obviously stuff in it. It wasn't really anything that stood out to me that was noteworthy of like deeper insight, I think, is how I would say it. But yeah, what I really liked about Heart of Darkness is how Conrad writes his characters. They feel very real, very human, and very alive. And I think it really brought a lot to this story, because ultimately it's a story of how humanity and humans can dehumanize other humans and take advantage of them. Obviously, specifically in this context, in a colonial context. And I think that a strong characterization really helps with this. And I think Marlowe is a very good example of that. He is very, very human, and obviously he sees that what Kurtz is doing to the natives is wrong, but he still participates in all the systems that allow Kurtz to dehumanize these natives so completely and to exploit their homeland so completely as well, and never realizes that, he may be just a guy doing a job looking for this guy, but at the end of the day, he is also a part of this, and he also, I think it was mentioned in the book that someone gave him the job, like someone he knew who was a friend or a family relation of someone else. So it's more like he's a part of it because he's friends with this person who was a relation with someone who works in the company that Kurtz works in, who hires him to go down the canal, the lake, the river, to find Kurtz, but doesn't realise that all these people are part of the same system that Kurtz is part of, and he is part of the system, and he is obviously not doing what Kurtz is doing to the natives, but he's part of the same system that they're in, and you can't have Kurtz without a Marlowe. So yeah, that's my little rant there about that. This on audiobook. The narrator is obviously very important, and David Horowitz narrated this book, and he brought so much to it. It was such a strong narration. It felt more like an audio drama or an audio play with like multiple people playing the different characters, but it's just the one narrator, who is just very good at these different kind of voices, and not just the voices. It's obviously the different like personalities behind the voices, and he's very good at like audibly differentiating in this, and I thought that was a really strong point to the book and really helped tell the story. Okay, so the next book is Web of Lies. It's a non-fiction book, and it's all about conspiracy theories, but specifically how there's an Irish element to this, and how it goes into the conspiracy theory. It goes into the Irish connection to this conspiracy theory. So the most obvious one is Gamergate. That it takes about like 50-60 pages in this book, but it explains what it is and what it was about, and like the kind of popular reaction to it, specifically online, and then it talks about how the Irish connection to that. So one of the people who was like instigating Gamergate was an Irish YouTuber, and then that's kind of the template for how this works. So it divides the sections up into kind of relevant things. So like like there's one for medicine and there's one for online stuff which Gamergate is part of, and then delves deep into the conspiracy theories, and then as I said it also winds back in the Irish element of this. So obviously it's kind of niche. I don't know how much you get out of it if you're not Irish, but it is very informative of the conspiracy theories in the first place. So I think that would be great to, if you want to get into conspiracy theories and kind of like see what people are thinking of them from a very analytical standpoint, I would recommend this book. Obviously more so if you're Irish, because then it's a bit more of a connection, but it's not necessary. And I gave this 4 stars, but again, because Goodreads doesn't have half or quarter stars, it's actually a 4.25 star review. And an element I highlighted in my written review on Goodreads that I just want to mention here is I didn't realise how important a role the internet played in modern conspiracy theories. It's obviously kind of like obvious, but I think when someone lays it out in the way that it's been laid out by this author, it really makes it a lot more obvious, specifically QAnon and how that relates to 4chan culture, and then how it kind of spreads throughout the rest of the world through the internet. I think is very interesting, and it's a new facet in which these ideas, or not even ideas, they're kind of like half-baked thoughts put together, like conspiracy theories are half-baked thoughts, and then just kind of spread around the world. So yeah, it was just a very interesting part that I thought was relevant to mention here. So the third book I read this year is called I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Meant for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. And I thought it was pretty good. Austin's very authentic in how she portrays these interactions that she has with white people, specifically around the intergenerational trauma that black people have endured, and that they kind of it's in their genetic makeup to be aware of these things. Does that make sense? Or intergenerational trauma from these horrific events that are just because of racism in America, in the States. I was going to say the South, but it's obviously not limited to the South. But specifically how they were kind of outcasted from society, and how they were lynched even up to the 1950s, and how generally white Americans have a misunderstanding of the black experience in America and what it's like to be a black person. And obviously, as I'm sitting before you, you can see I'm white as fuck. Obviously, I don't know what that's like, so I thought this book was very informative look into that world that helped me more empathise with the struggle that the black people go through in America, and specifically how they kind of only have their own community who understands and knows and gets it, whereas the vast majority of other Americans just don't understand, and how much of a daily struggle that is to kind of get those people to understand what the black American population is going through, and how it still affects them to this day, even though the systems like Jim Crow and the slavery system have also been abolished. Doesn't mean that racism has ended, and with such institutions that are so deeply rooted in a society, the society will still continue to be racist afterwards, and how that still to this current day is very relevant and still affects the people who live there. One critique of this is it's like it gets a lot of obviously Austin Channing is religious, and that comes across in her book, but as someone who's not religious, I didn't really relate to those parts. Now obviously I'm never going to fully relate, but it was more of not a skipping section, but one that I would kind of I wouldn't fully understand. Now obviously I get that it means a lot to her, and that comes across in the book, and I think that's very well done. Just as someone who's not religious, it's just like, okay, sure, whatever. Okay, so the fourth book I read this year is also a non-fiction book. It's called God's Executioner by Micheál Ó Siochrú, and this book is about Cromwell, and specifically Cromwell's war in Ireland. So I mentioned in my written review, I'll say it again here, is this book doesn't give you understanding of the English civil wars beforehand. So I would suggest reading or listening to something about that. Specifically, the one I'm going to recommend is the Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan. The first season of that podcast is on the English civil wars, and I found that very helpful to have understood that beforehand, because the book doesn't really explain it to you. And I didn't listen to that podcast going, well, I'm going to read this book, let me prepare. I just read it because I think it's an interesting podcast, and I think it's worthwhile, especially if you like non-fiction, because Mike Duncan's very factual and he's very entertaining in the ways he delivers these facts as well. And I think it's just a good place to get some historical information that's definitely correct, but mostly correct. He does issue corrections in the episodes, but he's a historian, so I trust his word and his sources and his research. And speaking of research, this book is very well referenced, and that comes across in all the footnotes. Not footnotes, in text referencing that you see throughout this book. And I thought that was very helpful, because obviously a non-fiction book needs to be grounded in facts and, a basis in reality, and I believe this one definitely had that. Not so much about the book, but about Cromwell as the person, is that he was only in Ireland for 9 months, but yet he committed so many atrocities and so many crimes, and is generally just such a reviled person in the Irish popular psyche. And this book gets into why. There's sections in the book which contain letters from Cromwell, and it's either Drogheda or Wexford. The assault on Drogheda or Wexford, the military establishment there. I can't remember if there are towns, fortified towns or fortresses or castles. But after one of those attacks, Cromwell has a letter in which he writes about how whatever action he took in this town was very, he's defending it the day after it happened, or the day it happened. So it's very, it's hard to put a name on what he did, but it's obvious that it was something that he was ashamed of and he wanted to cover up immediately. So the reason why I say it's hard to put a name on is because there's kind of a debate around whether it constitutes genocide or war crimes or whatever. And not being a historian, it's I don't know, but I know I don't like him, and there's a perfect reason for it as well. And I don't know if this book gets into it. No, it does actually. Yeah, it does. So it takes you through the Irish Civil War at this time. So it's hard to describe and distill it down. But essentially, there's the Royalists, and then there's the Loyalists to Cromwell and the English Parliament, and those are Loyalists. And then the Royalists are those who wish for Charles II, so that's son of Charles I, to be reinstated to the crown, the English crown, and go back to a monarchy. And the reason why this kind of split was especially important in Ireland is Cromwell and Parliament were seen as they were very harsh to Irish Catholics specifically. And the thought behind Royalist sentiment was that Charles II would be less inclined to enact harsh laws on Irish Catholics, and so that's why they were in favour of, or there was a split in favour of bringing him back. But then there were obviously some who were opposed to parliamentary or to monarchy at all. And the reason why I mention all that is after the war, the parliamentarians would take the land away from Irish Catholic landowners, and they sent them to Connacht. To hell or to Connacht is a famous quote that Cromwell is quoted as saying. I don't know if that's factual or accurate, but it's attributed to him in the popular understanding. And what happened was all the Catholic landowners in Leinster and Munster and Ulster had their land forcibly taken from them and were sent to Connacht, which was the worst province because it was very little fertile land for growing food on. It was very bad for raising animals on because it's very hilly and it's very remote. So essentially they were made leave their own land And this book details exactly how that happened and what the distribution was, like who got which land in like counties. So some were reserved for adventurers, some were reserved for those who fought in the Parliamentarian Army. The book gets more in depth and more nuanced than I can be here, but if that sounds interesting, then you should definitely read it. And it touches on the Catholic Confederation and how that state, like that's the state that Cromwell was fighting, is the Irish Confederation. So if you're interested in that, I think it would be worth a read. I think I give it 4 stars. Maybe I wasn't clear enough, but I just want to state that the reason why I bring up the difference between the Old English, the New English, and the Native Irish is they were all part of the Confederation of Ireland, and they all wanted different aims out of the war, and had different outcomes, different preferred outcomes for their peace settlement that they would have to make with parliamentarians after the war ended. So yeah, just wanted to be super specific that I include this clip and that I mention it just in case how I explained it beforehand wasn't clear enough. So yeah. Okay, so I've reset and come back better. Yeah, my camera died, so that's why I just took a second to reset and change my camera settings because it got darker. So hopefully you can see me better now. But I was talking about All the Shah's Men by Stephen Kinzer, and specifically why Mossadegh was overthrown was because the Iranian people weren't getting enough money from this company that had exclusive oil rights to exploit their oil that was on their land, and specifically refused to open their books for any Iranian accountants to see how much they were actually making. So what Mossadegh decided to do was to nationalise this company. So it would obviously be, all the profits would be kept in Iran for Iranian people, and this prompted the British to try and overthrow his country, or his government, and this didn't work until they got the Americans involved and sold them on the idea that Mossadegh was likely to search for communist support, specifically from Russia or China. So the British were kicked out after they tried to hold a coup in the country. Like British diplomats were kicked out, because those were obviously how they were able to infiltrate Iran, through those agents. So then Britain had to get America on side, and America was unwilling at first. But I believe there was a change of presidency, and the Duels brothers were brought in. I hope I'm saying that right, but fuck them anyway. Bunch of cunts, so I don't care if I get their names right. But they were brought into high positions of power. I think one was Secretary of State and the other was Secretary of Defense. Could be mistaken, but basically they were all for this coup, and they had to convince their president, or the president they were serving under, that it was worthwhile to do. And obviously they eventually did. I believe it was Eisenhower. I think that was it. Truman was, or maybe I'm completely mistaken. But anyway, that allowed, the American-backed coup went ahead, and that was what finally overthrew Mossadegh and his government. But it wasn't because America was interested specifically in overthrowing him, it was because Britain was interested in it, and they were able to tell the US that it was because Mossadegh was communist and he was thinking of taking Iran in a communist direction, which I don't think he was, but I'm not an expert on the region, but this book doesn't lead me to believe that he was. It gives me the impression that this was just what Britain was saying to make America do what they wanted. But yes, I think I was saying when my camera died how depressing this really is, because it shows how colonialism has evolved, and this was in the 1950s, 1960s. So how the British, or the British government was still able to extract resources and money from a foreign country while nominally not being in control of it. And yeah, it was just kind of depressing how they've been backwards to make no rules for themselves, to still steal your resources. And I think this book is pretty brilliant at portraying just how devious the whole thing was. Okay, the next book I read was not non-fiction, it's fiction, and it's a classic, and it's actually a collection of short stories. It is Dubliners by James Joyce. Now, my opinions on this are mixed, because it's a short story collection, so there's obviously more than one story in here, and my thoughts are that some of the stories are good, some of them are just okay, some of them are whatever, but then some of them are really good. The highlight is the one at the end. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the long one. It runs for like 30 pages. That was very, very good. I thought it was very insightful, and I think Joyce is really good at social commentary on like Irish society, and reading that put me down the road of wanting to search for more social commentary by Joyce, but specifically stuff that's relevant to like Irish nationalism and unionism and how those kind of contrast with each other. Because obviously in that story, one of the main characters is an Irish nationalist who writes for a unionist newspaper. I think he writes reviews of books, and that's something that Joyce did. So it feels like a self-criticism in a way. But what I really liked about it was it's the kind of again with Marlowe from Heart of Darkness, is how the person doesn't realise that because they're in the system, reviewing the newspapers for the unionists or going to find the madman who has terrorised the Congo, you are part of the system. So you are part of terrorising the Congo when you go find the guy because you're hired by the company, and how the main character in that Joyce short story doesn't realise that he's also part of the system that allows British imperial control to continue over Ireland, even if he's just writing reviews of books for a unionist newspaper. But yes, some of the highlights. Sorry, I'm just reading my Goodreads review. That's what I've been doing so far. But I've written down some highlights, some stories that I've liked. Oh yeah, The Dead, Clay, and Grace were some of the stories that I did enjoy. And Ivy Day in the Committee Room towards the end of the book. So all of the stories from Ivy Day in the Committee Room to the end, which is that longer one that I just mentioned, you kind of have to have some knowledge of Irish nationalism, but specifically how it relates to like Britain and specifically Irish unionism as well, as I mentioned, and how all of those kind of not really coexist, but how all those ideologies kind of relate to one another, specifically in relation to how people see the future of Ireland and how they view the colonial enterprises that happened here. One thing I did like about this is some characters are mentioned in other short stories, in the ones that have happened earlier on in the collection, and I just thought this was a very nice way of kind of making the whole place feel like they all knew each other to some degree, even if it was like a couple of degrees of separation. It was that kind of made it feel like all these stories were happening in the one place, which is obviously the intended effect here, because it's supposed to be a collection of stories about Dubliners living their daily lives. So yeah, and obviously if you live in Dublin, you'd know some of these streets, so you could be like, hey, that happened there, or this happened there, or whatever. Yeah, but it like this short story collection depends story to story. Like some of them are great, some of them are really, really thought-provoking, and obviously specifically as an Irish person, I don't know if you've heard my accent throughout the video so far, but obviously that's a common theme, is like Ireland and its political outlook. So to me this was very thought-provoking in some parts, but in others it was like, okay, it's whatever. Another one that just came into mind is the one that's about the intervention. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a guy gets really drunk and his friends stage him an intervention, but how they do it is kind of through the medium of kind of Catholic guilting him into it, even though he's a Protestant person. But I believe he converted for his wife, and yeah, it was just it was funny and it was humorous, and I enjoyed how they were telling him one thing but with a double meaning, kind of like, please just say yes, you want to go to this intervention. We're worried, but we're trying our best to make you go. I gave Dubliners a 3 stars on Goodreads, but I'd give it 3.5 if they had half stars. Okay, so the next one I read is a short story by Claire Keegan. I'd already read Foster from her, and I enjoyed that. And I watched On Colin Kuhn, and I enjoyed that. So I wanted to delve more into her other works. And the one I read is So Late in the Day, and this is a short story. I think it's like, I listened to it on an audiobook, and it was like 49 minutes, something like that, 50 minutes. It was very short, like you can get through it. So I imagine the page count is small enough as well. But this was a very cutting insight on Irish men specifically and how they relate or don't relate to love, and specifically how the little things in life make the love big in your life and not the other way around. So like you have to remember the small things about what your partner loves, so that you can kind of show them the bigger love. And specifically in this story, how not doing that fucks yourself. It doesn't fuck anyone else except yourself. And how this guy, our main character, is very like, he doesn't have time for other people. Really doesn't have time for himself. Really just doesn't show that he cares about anyone. Doesn't go out of his way to like get birthday presents or whatever. And it's just how he is saving his own money to his own detriment and to his own unhappiness and his own unending. I give it 4 stars, but if I could, I'd give it 3 3/4. It's very good, and I recommend it. Okay, so the next book I read was a non-fiction. It's Chip War by Chris Miller, and this details about the production and development of the computer chip and how this has transformed from something that was kind of a novelty to something that's essential to everyday life. Like we use computer chips in everything, we just don't realise it, and it goes into the manufacturing and like what kind of machines are required and the high tolerances that are required in such a specific field of manufacturing, and how there's really not much room for error, and how small the supply chain is, and how critical it is, and how like at risk of anything happening it is, because a lot of the fabs are manufactured in Taiwan, which obviously sits off the coast of China, and the geopolitical situation is that Taiwan is nominally, I think that's the right word to use there, nominally a different China than mainland China, but mainland China, the government doesn't see it that way. And it talks about the role that American companies played in the initial development of it, and Japanese companies later on, but it specifically looks at all of this kind of through a very obvious like American defense standpoint of like, well, we can't let these goddamn Chinese beat us to advanced chips, otherwise they'll blow up the world. It's like, hey man, you were kind of doing that when it was America. So yeah, I don't rate this book highly. I give it 2 stars. It's really more of a 2.5 star book, but it doesn't. The things I didn't like about it is it's obviously American biased, and that's fine, but I thought it was American biased towards American companies towards a point where it wasn't objective or factual in its presentation of the chip industry and the demands that were placed on it currently. And it doesn't go into the environmental or ecological aspect of us requiring more and more chips in everyday use, and how that's a huge detriment to our planet's existence. because like there are very various famines and genocides, I believe, in Sudan because they mine cobalt in Sudan, which is required in everything electronic, and it just left a lot out that I didn't know much about, but I knew was relevant to this story. That is kind of like, hey, there's half a book missing here. And my camera is about to run out of memory, so I'm gonna have to fix that, and then I'll be back with the last couple of books. I think it's like 4 books left. So this book I read is Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a very interesting depiction of the life of a plongeur in French restaurants and hotels. But I thought it was very interesting the differences between Paris and London and what it's like to be homeless or almost homeless in both of these places, and the kind of critiques that it has of society, specifically English society, and how it's much more bleaker than Paris society. It was funnier than I thought it would be. There were some funny moments in this, alright. One thing that was kind of Orwell kind of very strongly depicts is like the absolute poverty conditions that these people are living in, the destitution that it is, and how tough it is to live in these conditions. And he was very well able to bring those to life. And I believe this is a work of autofiction, so it's autobiographical and fictional, and I think that's why it's such a strong portrayal of its characters and its locations. And it's just a very good book, and I'd recommend it, especially for its like musings, or George Orwell's musings on work and what it means to work, and the virtues that a society takes from you working or not working, and how it looks at you and decides whether you're like worthy of humanity based on that, just having a job or not having a job. And obviously it's still very relevant to our society today, like regardless of which country you live in. I don't live in either England or France, and I still got a lot out of this book. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's relevant now as ever it was, and I actually did really enjoy the deep dives into like French hotel work and the kind of hierarchies and the psyches of the people working in there. And yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I enjoyed that more than the London section, but the London section is also bleak, and it gives an insight into kind of British mentality and British psyche. So yeah, I think it's worth it for that. So the next book I read is non-fiction. It's called Blood and Iron: The Rise and Fall of the German Empire. I didn't know much about this time period either, but it gives me a good understanding of before German unification and the geopolitical situation in Europe, and how Franco-Prussian wars helped to solidify Germany into a unified state, and also why it's a federal state as opposed to, I think it's a unitary state, I don't know, but like why they're all federated, because it comes from different kingdoms and different provinces and different duchies being melded together into this unified Germany. I thought it was interesting because it really, it's rapid, it's a quick book, but it definitely gives me an understanding of like why Bismarck was so instrumental in the forming of unified Germany, and then how that would, I suppose, inflict World War One. I don't know if that's a great way to phrase it, but how the rise of a unified Germany with its huge population and huge industrial power was a new force to be reckoned with that Imperial Europe didn't fully factor, I'd say, maybe into, just because it's so strong and it's so powerful. It's an up and coming country. I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting it right, in the phrasing, but I think you should understand what I mean. Um, and then the roles that specifically the German monarchs, the Prussian monarchs, held in kind of shaping the country, and then the author is quick to say, well, not quick, but like wants to state that like it's not solely responsible for the rise of Nazism and fascism in Germany after World War One, but that like Wilhelm II having to abdicate at the end of World War One is a reason for it, not the sole reason. And I do plan to read some Ian Kershaw's work. He has a biography on Hitler, I think, and it's a pretty thick one, I believe. So I'm gonna read that. I plan to read that, and I had that in mind when I picked this book up, and I feel it definitely gave me a good understanding of like the insight into the German people at this time, to be able to kind of continue along with the Ian Kershaw's work. And I gave this 4 stars because it was very informative, it was very factual, and a lot of references. You know, when you just go to the back page, I thought it was well referenced and well researched, and that's what I'm looking for in a non-fiction book. And this delivered it to me, and it was pretty short as well, which like it's not a negative for a non-fiction book to be overly long. Like it's going to be how they are. Like that's just the nature of the beast. But I appreciate this one was pretty short on the shorter side, but it still gave me a lot of information to work with and understand. And I feel it was a good book. Okay, so the next book I read is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I wanted to read his work for a while, but I wouldn't say disappointed, but the work didn't live up to the hype that I expected from him. And I think some of that can be just because I am kind of removed from the everyday like racial tension in America. Like I don't understand that world, so obviously you have to read it through a book or a newspaper or a movie or however. So I think that distance from it didn't really work for me. But what I do love about this is how it's a very different format for a book. It's a letter, a note to his son, and he's kind of just dictating to him how he feels about all the things that he's gone through in the state of America in its current time, or at time of release, which I think is 2019. Check. So no, it's 2015, but contemporary America nonetheless. And it again, like the Austin Channing Brown book that I mentioned earlier, details how the differences between kind of white Americans and black Americans, and just their understanding of their place in the world, and specifically American society. And I think, yeah, again, that distance from it, American society, has me putting it down as a 3-star read. But I think if you're American, you'll get a lot more out of it. I think it'll just be so much more innate to you to understand this kind of work. But I liked it regardless. It just didn't hit the highs I was expecting, and I do intend to read more of his work, specifically The Message. I'm interested in that. So I'm not writing them off yet. We're going to stick with this, and yeah, just going to read some more of his works like I would with anyone else, really. So as I'm looking through my Goodreads books, one was missing from it. So like I had a Goodreads review for it, but I have selected just the ones that I read this year. You know, my 2025 reads. For some reason, one book was missing from it. I don't know why, but I read it towards the start of the year. I think it was my second book of the year. But I'm going to talk to you about it now. It's called Minor Detail by Adiana Shibli. Adania Shibli, I should say. I'm sorry. So yeah, this is a book divided in 2 halves. One is contemporary, and the other is set in like 1948. So this details about the the Israeli conflict against Britain and the Arabic population in Palestine to establish an Israeli state in the country, or in the region. And that's what the 1948 section details. So we follow a soldier he's a commander of one of the camps in the Negev Desert, I think, or he's near the Negev Desert. That's where he's based. And the first half of that is we're kind of a fly on a wall. It's that kind of style of writing where we're observing the character, but we're not aware of their thoughts or their inner thoughts. So my critique of the first half was that it felt very stiff and it was kind of hard to follow. But I think that's just a personal thing I have when it's a lot of details and descriptions of stuff. It's just hard for me to picture all of those in my mind's eye and figure it out from there. And that's if you're okay with that, I don't think you'll struggle with the first half of this book. Just for me, it was that's the way it was. But then the second half, we switch styles and we switch characters and time period and basically everything. We follow a Palestinian woman who is, I believe, she's in one of the areas. I think it's Area B, and then she's real. Well, if I say more, it'll spoil the story. But or why we switched to her, why we switched to her perspective. But it was none of the problems with the first half were in the second half because we switched styles and we switched so many things. But she's taken a journey through Israel and through Palestine. But essentially, she can't go there because she doesn't have the correct security clearance because of where she lives. She has the wrong area on her passport or something. And we follow her journey through as she does go on this journey through I'm getting this in shot, through the wrong area. But yeah, this was really, really heartbreaking because seeing what the Palestinian people have to go through today, I'll just scroll through our social media feeds, how heartbreaking that is, how to see this just be allowed to continue. And then specifically for me as I was reading this, contrasting this with how harrowing it is for our second main character that we follow, the Palestinian woman, to go through all of these things, and how horrible with daily life it is, having to go through security checkpoints and be under constant surveillance and watching your every move, and then contrast that, how hard that was for her, and contrast that with just the absolute horror that is the genocide that Israel is currently doing to the Palestinian people. It was just so heartbreaking to think that what our character goes through in the book, the reality is just unfortunately so much worse. And yeah, it's one of those books that I don't know how to accurately sum it up, but it is depressing and it is bleak, and yeah, it's a tough read, but it's a necessary read, and I gave it 4 stars, but I think I'd give it something like 4.5, but Goodreads doesn't let you put in half stars. So okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about is Ghosts of Empire by Britain's Legacies in the Modern World, and this is by Kwasi Kwarteng. So this book is pretty good at detailing how the different parts of Britain and its colonial empire were administrated in different ways, even when the circumstances were similar, and how, when it comes down to it, a lot of British policy was dictated by the individual person who was there or in charge or made a decision, and that's why the results are so different. And it gives us a couple of good examples. So one is Sudan, and that Britain essentially administered, or when Britain was administering it or overseeing it, or however it was exactly worded, maybe a governorship, Sudan and South Sudan were part of one country, but the British policy was to have South Sudan essentially be administered separately because the cultures were different, North Sudan was more Muslim and more Arabic, and they deliberately forbade people from the north traveling to the south because South Sudan was more Christian and more African in culture. So they wanted to limit the influence, like the, what would you say, the cross community, cross region integration. And it was a deliberate policy that they pursued. But then it's contrasted with Nigeria, which has 3 different regions, which are all different religions, different cultures, but those were allowed to have people travelling from one to the other, and people going to other places. And this resulted in a bloody civil war after the British left Nigeria. And the way the author describes it is that Nigeria was too big and should have been more separate countries, and that's really what the start of the Civil War was about, the Nigerian Civil War. And the book does a good job of like highlighting those inconsistencies across colonial administration. It does another good job of highlighting how they all came from essentially the same kind of class, middle class, educated at Eton or Harrow, and with a degree in history, modern languages, or classics, and how those are kind of the descriptors of all of the colonial administrators, specifically ones who was it the boat race, the Oxford-Cambridge boat race? Is that it? I know that they get a blue ribbon, and like the people who had a blue ribbon for participating in those events, like Oxford versus Cambridge sporting events, not just the boat race, were called the Blues. And that's another signifier of those who would most likely be colonial administrators. And this was specifically in the South Sudan office. But it's just an example of how this kind of informal policy was in place across the empire, that these people from this class and this background were so ubiquitous in the administration of all these colonial regions that it really singles this out. And the author is also from this class background. But where I think the author goes wrong in their conclusion, and they really, really mess it up in the conclusion, in my opinion, is they essentially go, well, empire was both good and bad. And it's like, you've just spent 500 pages telling me why empire was bad because the policies weren't consistent. And the reason why I think the author comes to that conclusion is because they were a former Tory minister, and the Tories are obviously very conservative, very pro-Britain and pro-British Empire and pro-British legacy. And I just don't think the author is able to square the circle of the facts of the situation, which is colonial administration is horrible, and the British had a colonial empire that ruled half the world, and half the world resents them for it, with his position or his former position in the Tory party, which is obviously so pro-Britain. It's I don't think I need to describe it, you just kind of get it when I say it. So yeah, it's a good book. Maybe just skip the conclusion. I give it 2 stars because the conclusion is just so stupid. It makes no sense. Like, it's for a non-fiction book, not grounded in facts, not grounded in reality. It's just obviously a conclusion is subjective, but like, come on, man, you've come to the wrong conclusion. Sorry. And also on the point of what places are covered. So it doesn't cover every place that Britain had in its empire, and this was obviously just probably just a size thing. You can't cover them all, but it is interesting to look at some of the places which were not covered, like South Africa Kenya and Palestine. And specifically, I mentioned those because British policy would not be favourable to the conclusion that the author comes to in these places. So in Kenya, Britain used concentration camps against the Mau Mau people and the Mau Mau uprising. They pioneered this technology in South Africa against the Boers, because the Boers fought a war against the British to stay independent and not be part of the British Empire. And they put the Boer people in these concentration camps. I've gotten all this from another book called Legacy of Violence by Christine Elkins, I believe. But that's a thick book, and it also covers British colonialism. But I just mentioned that one because it's very good, and it's definitely recommended from me. But specifically with the Boer people, so obviously armies are usually made up of men. So how Britain would work in South Africa was they would imprison all the family members of suspected men in the Boer armies. So they would find their wives, their children, their sisters, their brothers, their parents, and they would just put them in these concentration camps that they had in South Africa to induce the fighters to give up the war quicker. And yeah, it's those places are not mentioned because in my opinion, the author couldn't find a way to hand wave why colonialism is good actually when Britain does it. And yeah, it's just I don't know what else to say. He obviously can't say the Empire was bad because he was a Tory member, so I don't know. I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. I didn't like the book because the conclusion it comes to is bad. I suppose I'll summarise the book and my opinions on it. The conclusion is not held up by what he spent the rest of the book telling me, but it is very informative and very factual and about what happened in these regions that it covers. It covers Hong Kong, India, Pakistan, specifically Kashmir and Jammu. The other ones I mentioned, South Sudan, Nigeria, and there are others that I can't recall now. I think there's 2 others. And when it talks, Burma is one of them. Malaysia, Myanmar, sorry. And when it goes into detail on these, it's very good and it's very informative, and I definitely learned a lot from this book. But it's just the conclusion lets it down so much that I'd say take the conclusion with a grain of salt, but the rest of the book is good. Well, I mean, I give it 2 stars, but remember what I've said when you're reading it. Okay, so the last book that I read is called Fidel Castro, the biography, or a biography, and it's originally a work in German by Volker Skierke, but this has been translated. I don't know the translator's name, but on the issue of translation, there are some silly, clunky translation mistakes, but it's not like it doesn't ruin the book or anything. It's just like, I think this is meant to be something else. I think it's meant to say something else here. The actual work, the contents in the book, so it starts with Castro's birth and continues up to the time of publishing, which I believe was like sometime in the early 2000s. So before he had died, before he'd stepped down from like complete control of Cuban government. But I really like what was detailed in here in some parts of it. So I enjoyed the sections about Castro's birth, his childhood, his upbringing. I thought those were very informative, very educational there. Specifically the revolution as well, that was good. I just wish that the details of like the actual events of Castro's revolution were longer, were more detailed. I found that to be very interesting. Much more so than they talk about the sections that go into detail about like the communist state that Castro sets up and his conversion to Marxism, Leninism, and specifically like his gripes with the Soviet system of Marxism, Leninism, and that's where I kind of lost kind of track of some of it, where it gets into like the economic theories and details, specifically when the revolution has been won and Batista has been ousted out of power. Like the new state that they form afterwards, Che Guevara is in charge of the economy. He's Minister for Economy, and it gets into a very detailed description of like Marxism, Leninism, economic style, economic outlook, specifically how Che Guevara viewed it versus the Soviet outlook on the economy, and just a lot of those passages really melted my mind because like I couldn't comprehend it because there was lots of very high level technical details and opinions being put to print, and I just couldn't comprehend what was going on, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem with the book. I don't know if it could have made it any simpler to understand, just that I didn't understand it, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna move on and see what's in the rest of it. So, like when I was finished it, like it was a slog to finish it out, but it's like 70 pages. I can do that, no problem. It was just when I was finished, I was very glad to be done with it and to be able to return it to the library. I was like, grand, this is over. I'll never have to look at this book again in my life. Another point that I found interesting was the Cuba-US relations and how that changed with the different presidents. And obviously, the big one is like, what was it like when JFK was in power? And it goes into that, and then it goes into kind of the blowback from JFK being soft on Cuba, or not being as hardline as Lyndon Johnson, who would come after him once he was assassinated, and it gets into his assassination and specifically how the author believes that it was a mix of Cuban exiles in Miami who are linked to the mafia with CIA agents who are helping those people to train for like an eventual invasion of Cuba. It goes over the Bay of Pigs invasion as well. That was before JFK was president. But the author theorizes on why JFK was assassinated, and I said it was a mix of those two groups. It also touches on how the assassins sent to kill Castro were never successful, and how he had sex with one of them because she was sent to kill him and he was just too full of riz, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting. There was some down parts in it, mainly in the latter half of it after after JFK gets assassinated, kind of. It also talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I thought that was interesting as well. But yeah, when it's kind of solely just Cuba, the Soviet Union, and the GDR is mentioned in it as well, and the German Democratic Republic, I think is what it stood for, the East Germany. Like a lot of the party leader of the East German communists and the secretary are mentioned a lot because they had a lot of correspondence with the Soviets and with Castro in Cuba, and those parts were more concerned with like is Castro on the right path to Marxism, Leninism? Has he done it too soon? Has he a proper understanding of it? And I was just not personally as interested in those sections as I were the other parts. And the author of the book I mentioned earlier, Blood and Iron, about the German Empire, has a book on the East German country. So I plan to read that in the future. I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads. That's about where I'd put it. Yeah, that's all the books I've read so far in the year. Books I plan to read is obviously the one I just mentioned, the Ian Kershaw's Hitler biography. What I'm reading right now, I'll show you in a second. Okay, so I mean, you can't really make it out without the cover on it, because it's a hardback, so I took the cover off because it's just easier to read it that way. But this is Stephen Kotkin's first volume on Stalin. It's called Paradoxes of Power, 1878 to 1928. So, yeah, just again reading about more communist leaders, would-be leaders. And the part I'm in, about 100 pages in, and he's not become leader of Russia yet, which is kind of expected of a book of this size. It's like 990 pages. Let me see. A total page count of 949 pages, and this is just the first volume of 3 in this series. So the first 2 are out already. The third one's coming next year, in July 26th, I believe. But yeah, this is just a non-fiction. It's very good so far. Only 100 pages in, but Kotkin gets very into detail about pre-Soviet Russia, so Imperial Russia, and its conquest, and specifically the Georgian people, as Stalin is Georgian, or Yugashvili, as he's known in this time period. Another one. I'll just cut to it. I don't know if you'd have seen them in the background, but this one was over this shoulder, and it's The First Heretic by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. It's a Warhammer book, specifically a Horus Heresy book. Big Warhammer fan. I've read all the first 6 in line. Flight of the Eisenstein, Horus Heresy, or Horus Rising as it's called, Galaxy in Flames, all those ones, and I'm going down the Wordbearers Ultramarines story arc, and I plan to go down the White Scars Thousand Suns story arc. I just wish I could get those books in physical, but I can get an eBay, I can get an ebook version of them. But yeah, thoughts on this one so far is it's very good. It really gets into why the heresy starts and who starts it, and it's very detailed. I think there's a lot in this book, and I really enjoy it. Aaron Dembski-Bowden is very good at writing. I've read a book he has written before called Titan Day. I think that's what it's called. It's one of the Warhammer Battles ones. I wasn't too impressed with that one. It was just like, it's good. It's got its moments and its bad moments. It was kind of just like a standard Warhammer book. And then this other one here, The Count of Monte Cristo, and again about another 100 pages into that one, and it's very good. I really enjoy it, and I went out and bought The Three Musketeers because I've read that before when I was a youth. I really liked it, and I also bought Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, another French writer. I'm in my French writer bag right now. Some other books to show you that I'm currently reading. My first Stephen King book, The Outsider, about 130 pages in. So far it's pretty good. I read about like 80 pages in a day, which for me, that's a lot of pages. I haven't read that many in one day in like a couple of years, like a good while. So I got really addicted to this. It's very, very fast paced. It's very intense. I'm really enjoying it. I picked this just up on a whim when I left a couple of books back into the library. Actually, some of the last books I talked about was the ones I left back in. I was like, okay, great, get these out of here. So I was looking around there, like, I'm not feeling non-fiction anymore. So I picked up Stephen King, because I've been meaning to read him for a while. His works have been adapted like so quickly. I was like, what's the story with him? What is up with this fella? Why are all his works getting optioned immediately into stories or into TV shows or movies? So yeah, I just was like, I seen this one there, I was like, sure, why not? And then another one I'm reading is Red Rising. It's very good as well. About another 100 pages in, I'm on chapter 16 specifically, and this one is very good. It is not what I thought it was. it takes so many twists and turns, even just in the first 100 pages, and it's so good. Pierce Brown's a great writer. He's very, very good at catching you unawares. You're just thinking, man, they can't possibly do what they're about to do. And then they do it. And then they do it. And it's just so good. You're like, everything tells me this won't happen. He just makes it happen anyway. It's very good. It's very good. I would recommend all the books that I've just pulled up in front of the camera, and I've been like, hey, I'm at 100 pages on this one. Yeah, I'd recommend them. As you can see, I love getting a book to 100 pages and be like, okay, now let's get another book to 100 pages. All of the books, except for some of the ones I've just put up here to be like, yo, I'm reading this one, have come from the library. So yeah, just join your local library, man. There's so much stuff in there to read. You will be kept going forever. It's such a cool thing that we get to have a library. Like, the concept of a library is such a cool thing. Like, just a place where you can go in and be like, I'm going to read that book. Join your library, man. It's cool. I'm sorry I yapped so much. Maybe you look up from your second monitor now and be like, oh man, he's finishing up. If you think what I talked about, the books I talked about, was interesting, or you think I'm good at talking about them, which I'm not, I just talk for way too long. But if you want to keep track of what I read, I will put my Storygraph and my Goodreads profile in the description. I update both of them anyway as I read. So, like, if you subscribe to or follow me on one platform, you won't miss out on what I post on the other. It's the same everywhere. Yeah, my throat is sore because I've just talked to a camera for so fucking long. I don't think I have anything else to say. Yeah, I like reading books. I hope you do too.